It started like any other lazy Saturday morning. The sun was out, the sky was a polished blue, and I was sitting in my backyard with a glass of lemonade in one hand and my dog sprawled at my feet. The pool water shimmered quietly under the early sun, the kind of peaceful morning that made me feel like every dime I'd spent on this house was worth it. That pool had been my dream for years. I'd saved, budgeted, and sacrificed to finally build it. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. A small patch of paradise tucked behind my modest home on the edge of a quiet suburban block where everyone kept to themselves. Or at least, they used to. I had barely taken my second sip when the first splash hit my ears. It was loud, invasive, wrong. I turned, puzzled, then froze. 3 kids were in my pool. Not beside it. Not walking past it. Inside. Cannonballing like it was some neighborhood water park. They had set their towels on my lawn furniture, their flip-flops were scattered around my deck, and one of them was drinking from a juice box that had clearly come from someone else's cooler. At first, I genuinely thought I was dreaming. I rubbed my eyes. But they were real. Loud. Wet. Laughing. Then came the voice that would make my blood boil for the next 6 months. It's their swim time today. Don't be rude. I looked toward the street and there she stood, Linda Hayes, hands on her hips, hair in a tight bun, and sunglasses perched on her head like a badge of authority. I'd seen her a few times before at block barbecues and the occasional parking dispute meeting, but we'd never really spoken. She lived down the road in the bigger corner house, the one with the oversized neighborhood watch sign planted right next to her mailbox. I walked toward the pool's edge, still in shock. "Excuse me," I said, waving for the kids to get out. One looked at me and shrugged. "My mom said it's okay." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I turned back to Linda. "This is my pool. On my private property." She didn't even flinch. "It's a shared amenity now. It's part of the community access plan. You're the only house with a pool, so we voted that it's open to all families in the zone." I laughed. Not politely. The full kind. "What community access plan?" I asked. She pulled out a folder from the crook of her arm, walked up to me like she was delivering a legal notice, and handed me a piece of paper. Printed in Comic Sans, no less. Neighborhood Council Amenity Schedule, Week 1. It had names and swim times and notes about courtesy towel pickup and no loud music after 6 p.m. My name was at the top, next to owner-host, Week A. I blinked, rereading it like it would make more sense the second time. "There's no HOA here," I said, finally regaining composure. "We're not under any homeowners association, and even if we were, I didn't sign any agreement." Her eyes twinkled like she was ready for that. "We're a voluntary HOA. We don't need city registration to organize. It's a community effort. And according to our charter, amenities can be designated for community use with majority consent." I could almost hear the gears grinding in my head. Charter? Consent? She was talking about my private pool like it was a public restroom. I stepped back inside and grabbed my property deed and boundary map. Brought them out like I was in court. "This is private land. Fully fenced. Paid for by me. No one gets to use this unless I say so." She smirked. "You're being selfish. It's not like we're asking for every day. Just a few slots here and there. You don't even use it that often." That was it. That one line. That assumption that because I hadn't filled the pool with guests every weekend, she had the right to assign it like a timeshare. I told the kids to get out. One obeyed. The others dragged their feet until I threatened to call the police. Linda didn't budge, though. She stood on the sidewalk like a general observing a minor skirmish. "This won't look good on the block newsletter," she warned. "We promote unity." I didn't say a word. Just walked back inside, locked the door, and sat in the kitchen trying to decide if I had just entered a prank reality show. But it got worse. Much worse. That evening, a notice was slipped under my door. It was printed on thick cardstock, made to look official. "Friendly reminder, as per the Neighborhood Council schedule, Tomorrow's swim slot belongs to the Morales family. Please ensure pool access by 10 a.m. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. But I barely slept that night. My thoughts were racing. How did she think this was okay? How many others believed her? I looked out my window at the pool, its surface still under the moonlight. That's when I realized something important. She didn't think she needed my permission. She believed that because no one had stopped her yet, she was entitled to keep going. That kind of mindset doesn't back down with logic. It doubles down when challenged. And I had just become the challenge. The next morning, I installed a lock on my gate and posted a sign that read "Private property, no trespassing." By noon, a kid was shaking the gate, and Linda was once again on the sidewalk. This time, she had printed papers in hand and was talking loudly to another neighbor. I could hear bits through the window. His being unreasonable. It's not like we're asking for his bedroom. The woman she was speaking to seemed hesitant, but Karen energy is magnetic to the right crowd. Within hours, I had 3 new flyers stuffed into my mailbox. One was titled Community Pool Use Policy. Another was a calendar titled Summer Water Fun. The last one simply said, "Don't be that neighbor." My frustration was turning into something else now. A slow burn. I was being cornered socially, pushed by fake rules and louder voices. I started taking notes. Every flyer, every visit, every witness. I documented everything. Called the county, then a real estate attorney. Everything on record. Because while she thought this was some neighborly negotiation, I knew better. You don't negotiate with people who break boundaries. You build better boundaries. Higher ones. Or in my case, deeper ones. That night, I Googled one word. Moat. The next morning started with a loud knock on my front door. I opened it to find my neighbor Greg standing there, shifting nervously, a flyer in his hand and an apologetic look on his face. "Hey man," he began. Just letting you know we got the schedule from Linda. Says my family's got pool time at 3 today. Just wanted to, make sure it's cool." I stared at him, my face expressionless. "Greg, that's my private pool, right? That schedule's not real. She made it up." Greg scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, I figured. I mean, I kinda knew. But she said if I didn't take my slot, we'd lose our spot on the rotation and... I don't know. She's been really pushy." I sighed and nodded, thanked him for coming over at least, and shut the door. That was my breaking point. I realized then that this wasn't just Karen being delusional, she was manipulating the entire neighborhood through fake authority and social pressure. People weren't just going along with her, they were scared of being outcast. She had them wrapped up in this fantasy HOA, and because no one challenged her hard enough, she kept tightening the leash. I wasn't going to be another person who shrugged and let it slide. I was done playing nice. I spent the rest of the day walking my property line, measuring every inch of the pool perimeter. I pulled out the original land survey and triple-checked the boundaries. The pool, deck, and surrounding lawn were all well within my rights. No shared paths, no public easements, no legal ambiguity. The law was firmly on my side. That's when the idea fully took root. The moat joke I'd made earlier wasn't just funny anymore, it was symbolic. Karen didn't respect fences or locked gates. She believed in pushing until people caved. So if she wanted to treat my pool like it was some medieval communal bathhouse, fine. I'd respond like a castle owner under siege. With a moat. And not just metaphorically. I contacted a landscaping contractor that same afternoon. I didn't ask if they'd ever built a moat before, I asked how quickly they could dig a trench, fill it with water, and make it look intentional, attractive, and permanent. The guy, Carlos, paused for a beat on the phone, then chuckled and said, "Man, this has got to be the best job I've ever been offered." We scheduled a consultation for the next day. I spent the night sketching ideas on paper. A shallow trench about 6 feet wide circling the pool deck, with stepping stone access from my back door, a retractable bridge, and decorative water features to make it look more aesthetic than defensive. The goal wasn't to look paranoid, It was to send a message. This is mine. You're not welcome here unless I say so. Carlos showed up with 2 crew members the next morning and we walked the yard together. He whistled low when I explained the situation. You want this to look like a koi pond on the surface but be functionally uninviting, right? I nodded. He grinned. I've got just the design. We marked it all out with spray paint, flagged utilities, and within 48 hours, the digging began. Karen, of course, was out front with her dog every 10 minutes pretending to walk it past my yard. On the 3rd day of excavation, she finally stopped and yelled over the fence. What are you building back there? A ditch? I didn't even look up. I just said, boundary enhancements. She laughed, but it was nervous. She knew something had shifted. By the end of the week, the trench was complete. We lined it with stone, added pumps to keep the water circulating, and filled it with dyed blue water to match the pool. A narrow drawbridge deck led from the house to the pool gate. I installed a coded lock on it. Carlos added a few LED lights for night illumination. The whole thing looked like a luxurious water feature. But anyone looking closely could tell, it wasn't for show. It was a moat. And it did exactly what I needed it to do. It created a psychological and physical barrier between me and Karen's delusions. The reactions from the neighbors were mixed. Greg stopped by again, eyes wide. Dude, you really did it. This is awesome. I smiled and handed him a soda. She's not coming near it now. He laughed but didn't disagree. Later that day, I heard someone honking out front. I peeked through the blinds. Karen had parked her SUV across from my driveway and was now standing on the sidewalk with a clipboard. She had 2 other women with her, both holding their phones like they were recording. Karen shouted, "This is community intimidation. You've escalated things in an unhealthy and unsanctioned way." I stepped onto my porch. There is no HOA. There are no sanctions. And this is my property. She fired back, "That moat is dangerous. What if a child falls in?" I shrugged. Well, they shouldn't be on private property, should they? Later that evening, I received an envelope taped to my door. It was labeled Legal Notice, Violation of Shared Amenity Access. I opened it and couldn't help laughing. Inside was a poorly written letter citing fake bylaws about community amenities and something called Rule 6.3, Host Property Modifications Without Group Approval. It claimed I was required to dismantle the moat within 10 business days or face neighborhood fines. There was even a fake seal at the bottom with the words Suburban Harmony Authority. I scanned it and emailed it to my attorney friend, who replied within 10 minutes, "This is hilarious and completely fake. Keep it. Might be useful later." I made copies and started a folder. Every note, every flyer, every message Karen sent, I documented them all. Not because I was scared, but because I knew this was no longer a simple dispute. It was turning into a legal and social campaign. Karen was attempting to create a false authority structure and use it to bully people. If I let her, she'd just find another target next. But I wasn't going to let it happen. I was going to expose her, dismantle every lie, and make sure no one ever tried to claim ownership of what wasn't theirs again. For now, the moat stood between us like a declaration. A line that said, "Cross this, and you'll regret it." And something told me Karen wasn't the type to let it go quietly. It didn't take long for Karen to escalate from passive-aggressive notes to outright warfare. The moat, which had started as a symbolic gesture, now became the battleground line between reason and madness. I woke up one morning to find bright orange cones lined along my front sidewalk, with a makeshift cardboard sign that read HOA Review in Progress, Non-Compliant Resident. She had taped it to a garden stake like it was some kind of official city notice. I pulled it out and tossed it in the trash without a word, but I knew it was a warning shot. Karen wasn't letting this go. She was now attempting to paint me as the villain to the entire neighborhood. A few people avoided eye contact when I passed by. Others looked uncomfortable, like they didn't know whether to wave or turn away. Greg texted me later that day, "Dude, Karen says you're under investigation by HOA. People are asking if it's true." I replied with a single sentence, "Ask her which HOA." That same evening, another flyer showed up. This one had a watermark that was clearly pulled from a Google image search, some stock photo of a courthouse seal. It was titled Amendment Proposal for Emergency Rule Enforcement. It listed made-up rules about communal asset reallocation, mandatory compliance periods, and something called civil forfeiture of nuisance installations. There were checkboxes at the bottom asking for neighbor votes. It was laughable. It looked like a child's attempt at official paperwork. But what alarmed me was that it was delivered to every single house on the street, tucked under windshield wipers, taped to fences, even slid under garage doors. Karen wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was campaigning. That night, I pulled up the security footage from the cameras I'd installed around the moat. The motion sensors had picked up movement around 11:32 p.m. I fast-forwarded, and there it was, Karen, hood up, dressed in black like she was starring in a bad spy movie. She crept along the fence, tiptoed to the moat's edge, and started tossing something into the water. I zoomed in and froze the frame. Bags of mulch. She was trying to clog the moat with debris. I watched her stumble, curse softly, then slip and land on her backside in the wet grass. I'll admit, I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But that laughter faded as I realized just how far she was willing to go. This wasn't a petty feud anymore. She was actively trespassing, vandalizing, and targeting me because I had the nerve to say no. The next morning, I took the footage straight to the sheriff's office. Officer Raines, a tall man with a southern drawl and the patience of a monk, watched the clip without saying a word. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and said, "She really dressed like a burglar to throw mulch in a trench." I nodded. He shook his head. "You want to press charges?" I told him not yet. I wanted it on record, but I didn't want to start a full legal war unless it escalated further. He promised to file an official incident report and said he'd swing by Karen's place to have a word. I thanked him and drove home feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I knew that confronting Karen would only make her more determined. Sure enough, the retaliation came fast. Over the next few days, the moat was targeted repeatedly. Someone dumped a bag of sand in it. Another night, I found empty soda cans floating in the water. Once, someone had tossed a rusted bicycle into it like they were trying to pollute it beyond recognition. Each time, I cleaned it up, replaced the filters, and added more cameras. But I also started noticing something else. The neighbors were beginning to turn. Not against me, but against Karen. People started whispering. A woman named Judy from 2 houses down approached me one afternoon while walking her dog. "I just want to say, I didn't vote for any of that. Karen's pushing everyone too far. She acts like she owns the block." I thanked her, and she smiled awkwardly. "By the way, my son thinks your moat is the coolest thing ever. He wants one around his trampoline now." The turning point came during what Karen called the emergency HOA meeting, held on her lawn under a cheap blue canopy. She had folding chairs set up and printed fake badges for herself and her 2 friends, calling themselves the executive board. I wasn't invited, of course, but Greg went and recorded the entire thing on his phone. He sent it to me later that night with a laughing emoji. In the video, Karen ranted for over 15 minutes about how I was destabilizing the harmony of the street, and how I had created a hostile aquatic perimeter that endangered children. She waved printouts of what she claimed were legal documents, although half the pages were blank. One of the board members asked what specific law I had broken. Karen snapped at her and said, "Do you want to be next?" The room, or rather, the lawn, went silent. A few people walked out during the speech. Others mumbled to each other and avoided Karen's eyes. It was clear that her grip was loosening. The moat hadn't just blocked access to my pool, it had started exposing the absurdity of her self-proclaimed authority. The more she shouted, the more ridiculous she sounded. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She just doubled down. The next morning, I received a thick manila envelope in the mail. It had no return address. Inside were 10 pages of printed HOA bylaws, a fake fine notice for $10,000, and a photocopy of what looked like a property zoning form, except my name was spelled wrong, and the date on it was from 1994. It was a pathetic attempt to intimidate me, but I had had enough. I took everything to my attorney. We sat down, went through the paperwork, and by the end of the hour, he had drafted a cease and desist letter that was so sharp it might as well have been made of steel. It outlined every fake document, every fraudulent claim, every instance of harassment, and concluded with a threat of legal action if she didn't immediately stop all behavior related to her fake HOA. We also included a screenshot of her trespassing from the security footage and a note that if there was one more incident, we'd file criminal charges. I had the letter delivered by courier, handed to her directly. She didn't open it right away. Just stood there holding it, lips pursed, eyes burning holes into the messenger's back. That night, the neighborhood was quiet. No kids in my yard. No cones on the sidewalk. No flyers. But I knew better than to believe it was over. Karen was wounded, cornered, and humiliated, but that made her even more dangerous. And deep down, I could feel it. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I woke up to a soft hum outside, the kind that you can't place at first but immediately know doesn't belong. When I looked out the window, I saw a drone hovering over my backyard. It wasn't subtle, it buzzed low over the moat, did a slow circle over the pool, then zipped up like it was scouting targets. I stepped outside, camera in hand, and recorded it as it drifted up and away, vanishing behind Karen's rooftop. I didn't need confirmation. She'd finally gone full surveillance mode. After the cease and desist letter, instead of backing off, she'd turned to a new strategy: document everything I did so she could somehow flip it into a legal win. I should have been mad. Instead, I felt something new, a quiet determination. If she wanted a war of documentation and exposure, then she had no idea who she was dealing with. I had timestamps, security footage, legal records, and half the neighborhood growing more annoyed with her by the day. I just needed to push things the right way. Later that morning, I received a message on my doorbell cam. A real estate agent had stopped by and left her card. When I called her back, she explained that she'd been hired by Karen to do a property evaluation, specifically mentioning neighborhood improvements and shared community access rights. I nearly laughed. Karen was trying to inflate her home's value using access to my private pool. I calmly explained that there was no such access, that her claims were fraudulent, and that any attempt to list the property with that false amenity would result in a legal complaint. The realtor went quiet, apologized, and promised to clarify things. Just as I hung up, I received a text from Greg. "Bro, check the Nextdoor app. She's melting down." I opened it and found an entire post thread written by Karen titled, "The Tyrant Among Us." She accused me of turning the block into a militarized zone, claimed I'd weaponized landscaping, and warned neighbors that I was watching everyone with military-grade cameras. One of her comments even said, "His ex-CIA or something, I swear. I saw him measuring things with a laser pointer." I hadn't laughed that hard in weeks. But as funny as her posts were, they were also dangerous. She was spreading lies to anyone who would listen, trying to paint me as some kind of paranoid threat. It was character assassination, plain and simple. I posted a polite but firm response with evidence, screenshots of the fake HOA documents, footage of her trespassing, and even a photo of her standing by the moat with a garbage bag. Within hours, the tide shifted. Dozens of neighbors commented in support of me. Some shared their own stories of Karen harassing them, including one woman who said Karen had tried to fine her for having unauthorized lawn decor. One man said Karen once knocked on his door to scold him for grilling after 6 p.m. because it violated neighborhood air quality. For the first time, her illusion of power began to crack in public. The next day, a police car pulled into Karen's driveway. She stood on the porch arguing with the officer for nearly 30 minutes. I didn't know what was said, but the body language said it all. She was on the defensive, arms flailing, pacing in small circles while the officer calmly took notes. A few hours later, I got a call from Officer Rains. He let me know that an official warning had been issued for trespassing, misuse of property claims, and harassment through false documentation. We told her she's one step away from a court date, he said. But between us, if you've got more footage, keep it. She's going to try something else. I can feel it. I thanked him, but I already knew what I had to do. I called my lawyer and asked what the process would look like to file an injunction and pursue damages if needed. He said we could draft something immediately and send it through a judge if she stepped out of line one more time. So we prepared everything: names, dates, evidence. The case file was ready. All I had to do was wait for her to do what she always did: take things too far. And I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, I was watching a movie when the Moat cam triggered. I pulled up the feed and saw 2 teenagers standing at the edge of the trench, holding buckets. They tossed something into the water, laughed, then ran off. The next morning, I discovered it was paint. Blue, green, and red. The entire moat was streaked with color, the water pumps clogged with sludge. It wasn't just vandalism. It was planned sabotage. I rewound the footage, zoomed in, and recognized one of the boys. He was Karen's nephew. I'd seen him washing her car a few weeks earlier. That was the final straw. I sent the footage to my lawyer, then drove straight to the sheriff's department. I filed a formal complaint for property damage, cited ongoing harassment, and submitted the full incident log. Officer Rains didn't even hesitate this time. "We're going to her house today," he said. "And we'll be taking the kid in for questioning." Later that afternoon, half the street watched as a second patrol car arrived at Karen's house. Her nephew was escorted out in tears. Karen stood on her lawn shouting, "This is insane. He's just a kid. This is revenge." But no one moved to help her. No one protested. Some neighbors actually applauded. I stayed on my porch, arms folded, silent. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was doing the work for me. That evening, a new notice was placed on Karen's door, a court summons. She'd have to appear for a hearing regarding trespassing, defamation, and incitement of property damage. For the first time since all of this started, I sat by my pool and genuinely relaxed. The moat lights reflected off the water, gently shifting with the breeze. My dog dozed next to me, and the sound of crickets replaced the chaos of Karen's voice. It wasn't over yet, not officially. But something had changed. The power had shifted. The neighborhood was no longer under her thumb. Her supporters had vanished. Her voice had become background noise. And soon, the courtroom would hear every lie, every stunt, and every fake paper she ever circulated. And when it did, there'd be no HOA title to hide behind. Just Karen. Exposed. Alone. And, finally, silent. The courthouse lobby was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in atmosphere. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension wrapped around the building like a thick fog. I wasn't nervous, I had everything I needed, from video evidence to legal documents, all neatly compiled in a black folder tucked under my arm. Across the lobby, Karen sat alone on a bench, her usual smug expression now replaced with a look that was halfway between desperation and denial. Her hair was less tightly pulled, her clothes slightly disheveled, and the printed badge she used to wear that read HOA President was gone. The illusion had collapsed, and for the first time, I think she realized she had pushed too far. But even now, she refused to make eye contact with me. She just stared ahead like she was still trying to convince herself she had a chance. The court clerk called both parties in, and we entered a small courtroom. It wasn't the kind you see on TV. No dramatic lighting or raised platforms. Just a judge at a plain wooden desk, 2 attorneys, and a handful of observers seated behind us. My lawyer, calm and efficient, laid out everything like a carefully constructed timeline. He started with Karen's fake HOA flyers, then moved to the surveillance footage of trespassing, the printed threats, the drone incident, and finally, the paint bucket sabotage by her nephew. The judge listened intently, barely blinking, only interrupting to clarify a few names and dates. When Karen's turn came, she stood up with her own folder, thick with printed internet pages, outdated community bylaws from neighborhoods we didn't even belong to, and bizarre letters she'd written to herself about community morale. Her voice cracked midway through. She claimed everything she'd done was to bring unity to a fractured street, and that I had turned a shared opportunity into a fortress. Her lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, kept his head low and said almost nothing. It was clear she'd lost support even from the person she was paying to defend her. The judge took everything into consideration and then said the words I'll never forget: "This is a textbook case of harassment, trespassing, and intentional defamation. You may call it community spirit, Ms. Hayes, but the law calls it a violation of private rights." He ruled that Karen must pay damages for the Moat cleanup, install no surveillance facing my property, and issue a formal retraction of her HOA claims. But what really made her face drain of all color was when he added, "You are hereby prohibited from establishing, representing, or operating any community organization, formal or informal, in this jurisdiction for the next 5 years." That was it. Her entire campaign, her need for control, her imaginary empire, it had all been revoked in one sentence. The court ordered her to post the retraction on every platform she had used to spread her lies, including Nextdoor, Facebook, and her monthly print newsletter. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The fight was over. The Moat had started as a joke, a reaction to ridiculous entitlement, but it had become a symbol of personal boundaries. Not just physical, but emotional. Karen had crossed every line, and now those lines had been redrawn, permanently. Word spread quickly across the neighborhood. Karen's retraction posts were up by sundown, stiff and insincere but legally required. People commented with sarcastic congratulations, gifs, and finally, truth. One neighbor even wrote, "I knew the Moat guy would win." It became a nickname of sorts, the Moat guy. Kids on the street started referring to my pool area as the castle. It didn't bother me. If anything, it reminded me that I had turned a passive mess into something unforgettable. A few weeks later, Karen's house went up for sale. There was no dramatic moving day. No goodbyes. One morning, the for sale sign appeared. A month after that, a moving truck quietly pulled in and out. She was gone. Her chapter in our lives closed without ceremony. Rumors said she moved to another county, one with an actual HOA. I hoped, for everyone's sake, that they were better equipped to deal with her. With Karen gone, peace returned to the block. People actually began talking more. We had a real community gathering one weekend, nothing formal, no weird flyers or assigned seating, just people bringing snacks, talking, and laughing. Greg grilled burgers, Judy brought lemonade, and I offered to let the kids watch the koi fish I'd added to the Moat. Yes, I kept it. But I cleaned it up, turned it into a decorative feature, planted water lilies, and installed soft lighting. What began as a wall was now a bridge. I even put up a sign in the yard that said Royal Waters, by invitation only. People loved it. The funniest part came months later when I received a call from a local lifestyle magazine. Apparently, someone had submitted a story pitch about the man who built a moat to defend his backyard. The editor wanted to interview me and maybe do a photo shoot. I laughed, politely declined the shoot, but agreed to the story if they left out my address. They ran the article anyway, and it went viral online. Suddenly, I was getting emails from strangers saying things like "You're a legend" or "I wish you lived in our neighborhood." A few people even asked for moat design advice. One guy in Arizona wrote, "My neighbor keeps trimming my bushes without asking. Think I can moat my garden?" It was absurd, surreal, and strangely satisfying. But I didn't let it go to my head. I just kept living, quietly enjoying the space I fought so hard to protect. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a real estate agent. Not the same one Karen had hired, but someone new. "Hey," she said, "I'm handling the property sale next door. The buyer wants to meet you. Says they are fascinated by the whole Moat story." I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything. When the buyer showed up, she introduced herself as Ava, a landscape architect who had followed the story online and fallen in love with the neighborhood. She didn't ask questions about the feud, just complimented the design of the moat and said it was the most creative use of backyard space she'd seen. We talked for an hour. It was easy, relaxed, refreshing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just known for surviving HOA Karen, I was seen as something more. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the moat water golden, I sat back in my chair and thought about everything. About the fake bylaws, the drone, the paint, the lies, and the fight it took to hold on to what was mine. It had been exhausting, absurd, and at times infuriating. But it had also been clarifying. Boundaries matter. Not just the fences we build or the signs we post, but the courage it takes to say no when someone demands a piece of you that they are not entitled to. Karen came into my life like a storm, convinced she could claim what wasn't hers. But in the end, it wasn't just the moat that stopped her. It was the truth, consistency, and a refusal to be pushed. And that's the part I'll never forget.